You have been created for struggle. You have been called to fight, to cast down resignations, to trample daunting obstacles, to stand unmoved when all your flesh would whisper, "Give up." You must steel your heart, for the road is long and flame, lit only in places. There will be days when the silence seems deafening, when nothing stirs but despair, when the air presses in on you. And precisely in that furnace, you must cling with trembling hands to one irrevocable resolve: never quit. You may say, "How often have I failed? How many times have my steps faltered?" The question is not whether you will stumble. You will. The question is, will you rise when your knees tremble and your vision blurs? Will you still stand? Will you cry to the heavens and press on? Will desperation become your weapon rather than your undoing? God does not ask for your comfort. If he did, you would flee to the hills. He asks for your faith, yielding, relentless, unshaken. The test is not when the wind is favorable, but when the tempest rages. If your calling is true, it is refined in fire, forged upon sharp edges, made strong by resistance. In the deepest pits of discouragement, remember, you were not made for ease. You were made for endurance, for relentless obedience, for pressing through. To say never quit is to say, no power in heaven or on earth can ultimately thwart the one who presses forward by faith. That does not mean you will always see victory on this side. Many a battle ends in suffering. Many a race ends in tears. Yet the race is not over until the last step is taken. Hope is not counted out until the last breath is drawn. You say, "But I'm weary. I can't go on." Let that very weakness be your altar. Present your brokenness, your exhaustion, your doubt, your fear. Lay them before God. Then rise from your knees with a resolve that trembling hands may fail, but a determined soul will not. The Lord cherishes the cry of the broken heart. He meets you at the edge of your ability. Many who never fled in despair saw the unexpected dawn. Do you see that great cloud of witnesses? They call you on. They testify that God rewards endurance. Every soul who held fast through darkness, whose courage refused to bow, even when the flesh cried out, now declares, "You can too." Their voices mingle with your own resolve. Do not despise them. Let their victories impel you. Their scars speak. Though the road was cruel, they did not surrender. When your convictions are assaulted by ridicule, when your doctrine is mocked, when your motives are impugned, hold firmly. The greater the attack, the more weight your cause bears. If you trod the broad and flattering path, you might find fewer enemies, but your character would rust in idleness. The narrow way is beset with opposition because its prize is precious. Your adversaries are not mere men. Dark powers scheme to extinguish your light. To yield would be to betray your calling, to dishonor your salvation, to forsake your commission. Never quit when promises seem distant. Never quit when results are meager. Never quit when your heart is heavy. Do not live by sight, but by conviction. Plant your feet on the sure foundation of His Word. When the sun fails, when the breeze dies, when all forsake you, God remains faithful. He is the faithful witness. His pledge is not contingent on your circumstances, but on His nature. I know your scars. I know your nights of weeping. You have walked through valleys where no path is visible, where hope seemed buried. Yet in every such valley He has walked with you. When you could not see, He bore your trembling steps. When you could not speak, He groaned with you. When you weakly whispered a prayer, He inclines His ear. The trials were not a mistake. They were your training ground. Do not shrink from suffering. Do not flinch when the flame touches you. Let it refine, not destroy. Let it purge the dross, burn away the facade, leave a man or a woman of diamond. If you flee the fire, you never taste the purity of the prize. If you wither under affliction, you forfeit the honor. What discipline can do, crisis cannot undo. Be trained in the ordinary days, so that in extraordinary times you fall to your knees and say, "Not by might, nor by power, but by your Spirit." You will find that your strength fails, but His strength is renewed to you. You will feel empty, but His fullness will flood you. You will come undone, but He will gather the fragments. When people whisper that you've lost your zeal, when accusations fly, when your reputation is assailed, even then press on. Let the pure motive of serving Him keep you grounded. A man or woman of resolve does not turn at every bump or swerve in the road. You will not please all men. You will not escape trials. But if the prize is true, you must risk all for it. Consider those who went before. They did not look back. They looked up. They walked through flame. They bore reproach. They were weary. But they did not quit. If their bones could speak, they would tell you. The victory lies just beyond the horizon of your faith. Just another dawn, another push, one more step. Let your life count. Do not settle for lukewarm. Do not shrink to comfort. Do not barter integrity for ease. Let the years of your toil echo long after your body lies silent. Let your voice carry into dark places where others dare not enter. Let your perseverance become a beacon. If He could endure, I may endure too. Let the gospel suffer no shame in you. Let your persistence vindicate the cause. When the road twists, when sorrow comes, when failure mocks you, say, I will not quit. Say it softly in prayer. Say it with trembling lips. Say it when no one hears. Say it in the silent hours when doubts swarm. But say it, bury it deep, cling to it as to your last thread. Because if you quit, what remains regret, a withered calling, a promise unfulfilled. You were not created for a mediocre finish. You were called for battle, for conquest, for endurance. Your fight is not against flesh and blood alone, but against principalities, against darkness itself. If you abandon now, you feed the darkness, but if you press on, you push back the night. Remember, one step may seem feeble. A broken voice may seem weak, a frail body may seem unfit, but in weakness the power of God is made perfect. Do not despise small beginnings. Do not treat small victories as negligible. The smallest step in the right direction, when repeated, becomes a march. The smallest act of obedience repeated in faith becomes a fortress. Hold fast to the promise. He who has begun a good work in you will complete it, not by your perfection, but by His perseverance. You have a partner infinitely greater than yourself. Link your arm with His, and you become abiding. When your hands tremble, His grip does not. When your courage flickers, His resolve is unmoved. Your faint heart is covered by His endless faithfulness. I urge you, stay at your post. Do not retreat. Do not sign a truce with the enemy. Do not lower your banner. Even if the battle drags on long and grueling, even if the sunrise seems distant, do not yield. In that very night you fear is often where the miracle waits. If you must crawl, crawl. If you must weep, weep, but do not quit. Better to fall exhausted at the feet of God, believing you pressed on, than to wander safe, resigned and complacent. Better to fight to your last breath, with scars, faith bleeding, cry in your heart, than to lie down in soft surrender. To quit is to die while still breathing. Live with that unshakable resolve. Never quit. Let it run in your blood. Let it echo in your bones. Let it shape your every decision, your every step. Let it be your war cry when the winds howl. Let it be your prayer when the night is deepest. Let it be your inheritance, a soul that would never bend, never break, never bow. Go on, press deeply, descend into the valley if need be, climb the mountain again if you must, but never retreat, never quit, because the one who called you is faithful, and at the end your perseverance will shine not as your glory, but His. The core message is that perseverance isn't based on emotions, visible results, or human strength, but on unwavering faith in God's character and calling. Even when everything seems against you, silence, failure, suffering, you are called to press on, by trusting in his faithfulness. Refusing to give up despite pain, opposition, or weariness is not just personal resilience. It's a form of obedience and worship. To endure is to testify that God's promises are worth more than temporary relief, and your perseverance becomes a declaration of His worth. Endurance through faith, not feelings, is a principle deeply rooted in the struggle of every believer who has ever faced trials, hardships, and moments where the soul feels as if it might break. To understand this is to grasp the very nature of what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. This endurance is not a product of human emotion or fleeting motivation. Rather, it is the steadfastness that emerges from a trust anchored in the eternal and unchanging character of God. When the heart is overwhelmed by circumstances and the mind is clouded with doubt, it is not feelings that must carry the believer forward, but a resolute faith that refuses to be moved by the shifting sands of experience. In this life, the believer is not promised a smooth path. The Scriptures are clear: we will face trials, persecutions, and suffering. Yet, these are not signs of God's abandonment or displeasure, but opportunities to exercise faith and be refined in character. The Christian life is not lived in the absence of difficulty, but through it. The endurance required is not a passive waiting, but an active, continual choice to believe that God is good, that He is sovereign, and that His promises are sure, even when the circumstances scream otherwise. Feelings are notoriously unreliable. They rise and fall like waves in the sea. One moment, the heart may be filled with joy and hope, and the next with despair and fear. If endurance were based solely on feelings, no one would stand firm in the face of prolonged suffering. Feelings can deceive, entice, and betray. They are shaped by external events, physical health, and even the weather. But faith is rooted in the unchanging truth of God's word and character. It looks beyond the immediate to the eternal, beyond what is seen to what is unseen. The Apostle Paul understood this deeply. He wrote of his own sufferings, imprisonments, and persecutions, yet he persevered. He did not rely on his own strength or fleeting feelings of encouragement, but on the promise that God's grace was sufficient and His power made perfect in weakness. Paul's endurance was not a result of his circumstances improving, but of his perspective being fixed on Christ. He knew that his present troubles were momentary and light compared to the eternal glory that awaited. His faith was the lens through which he viewed suffering, transforming it from a cause of despair into an occasion for hope. When trials come, it is natural for the feelings to waver. Fear may grip the heart, doubt may cloud the mind, and sorrow may weigh down the spirit. But the believer who endures is one who refuses to capitulate to these feelings. They acknowledge their presence, but do not grant them ultimate authority. Instead, they hold fast to God's promises, even when they cannot feel His presence. This is not easy. It requires a deliberate act of the will, a daily renewal of commitment to trust rather than to feel. One of the greatest enemies of endurance is the temptation to base faith on how one feels. When the heart is heavy and the emotions are dark, it can be tempting to conclude that God is distant or uncaring. But these conclusions are often lies whispered by the enemy to discourage and defeat. The truth is that God's faithfulness does not depend on our feelings. He is faithful even when we feel faithless. His love is constant even when we feel unloved. To endure through faith and not feelings means to hold on to these truths even when our emotions say otherwise. Faith endures because it is connected to the character of God, who does not change. The psalmist declares, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." This is not a conditional statement based on feelings, but a declaration of fact. God's presence is not dependent on whether we feel it or not. It is a reality that can be trusted even in the darkest moments. The believer who learns to rest in this unchanging reality will find strength to endure when the world offers none. Endurance through faith is also cultivated through the discipline of fixing one's eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Jesus endured the cross, despising its shame, because of the joy set before him. His example teaches believers that endurance is a journey of faith that looks beyond immediate suffering to the eternal reward. When we focus on Jesus, our faith grows and our endurance is strengthened. The trials of this life become opportunities to grow deeper in trust rather than reasons to turn back. Another vital aspect of enduring through faith and not feelings is the community of believers. We are not meant to walk this road alone. The great cloud of witnesses encourages us by their example and presence. Their stories of faithfulness despite hardship remind us that endurance is possible. Encouragement from fellow believers, prayer, and the ministry of the Word all serve to bolster faith when feelings fail. In the fellowship of the church, faith is often renewed and endurance made possible. It is important to recognize that endurance does not mean ignoring or suppressing feelings. God created emotions for a purpose, and they are an essential part of human experience. However, endurance means that feelings do not dictate the course of our faith. We do not allow them to define our reality or control our response to trials. Instead, feelings are acknowledged and brought under the lordship of faith in God's promises. In the moments when the heart is overwhelmed by grief, anxiety, or confusion, faith acts as an anchor. It holds the soul steady amidst the storms. This is why the writer of Hebrews exhorts believers to run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus. This race is not one of emotional highs and lows, but one of steadfast commitment, perseverance, and trust. Sometimes endurance through faith means embracing weakness. It is in our weakness that God's power is made perfect. When we cannot rely on our feelings or strength, we rely wholly on Him. This paradox is at the heart of the Christian life. The more we surrender, the stronger we become. Faith is not the absence of difficulty, but the means by which we navigate it with God's help. Endurance is also a testimony to the world. In a culture that prizes instant gratification and ease, a believer who endures trials with faith speaks loudly of a hope that transcends circumstances. The witness of perseverance under pressure is a powerful gospel testimony. It shows that faith is not a feeling, but a firm foundation that can withstand any storm. There will be days when the journey feels unbearable, when the heart cries out for relief, and when the temptation to quit is overwhelming. On those days, endurance through faith is an act of obedience. It is a choice to believe God's promises rather than trust the fickle tides of emotion. It is a refusal to let circumstances dictate the state of the soul. This faith is not a blind leap, but a reasoned trust in the nature of God and His Word. It is grounded in the historical faithfulness of God, in the resurrection of Christ, and in the personal experience of God's sustaining grace. Each time the believer chooses faith over feelings, endurance is strengthened and faith deepened. The journey of endurance is not solitary, but one of reliance on the Holy Spirit. It is He who empowers the believer to stand firm. He comforts in sorrow, strengthens in weakness, and renews hope when it fades. Faith endures because the Spirit works within to uphold the soul beyond what human effort could sustain. Endurance through faith demands patience. God's timing is perfect, though often mysterious to us. Waiting is not inactivity, but an active trust that God is working even when we cannot see. This waiting produces perseverance, character, and hope. The believer learns to rest in God's timing rather than push ahead in their own strength or despair. In the face of unanswered prayers, loss, and disappointment, faith endures by holding on to the truth that God is sovereign and good. He works all things for the good of those who love Him. This is not a promise that everything will be easy, but that nothing will be wasted. Endurance through faith trusts that God's purpose is greater than present suffering. To endure through faith and not feelings is to live in the tension of the already and not yet of the Christian hope. We live in a broken world where suffering is real, yet we anticipate a future glory that will make all things new. This tension fuels endurance, because it gives hope beyond the present and meaning in the midst of trials. Every believer is called to this kind of endurance. It is not reserved for the spiritual or those with exceptional circumstances. It is the calling of all who follow Christ. The ordinary Christian, facing everyday struggles, is called to endure by faith, not feelings. This daily perseverance is the proving ground of genuine faith. In this way, endurance through faith becomes a transformative journey. It shapes character, deepens dependence on God, and refines hope. It teaches the believer that life is not about comfort or ease, but about faithfulness. This faithfulness is lived out moment by moment, choice by choice, even when feelings waver. Faith and endurance are intertwined. One cannot truly exist without the other. Faith fuels endurance, and endurance strengthens faith. The more the believer endures, the more their faith is tested and confirmed. This process produces maturity and spiritual depth that no fleeting feeling could ever provide. The believer's testimony of endurance becomes a legacy for others. It inspires the next generation to hold fast when trials come. It encourages the weary and sustains the faint-hearted. Endurance through faith is a flame passed from one to another, igniting hope in dark places. In conclusion, endurance through faith and not feelings is the heartbeat of the Christian life. It is the path of those who refuse to be defined by circumstances or emotions, but who look steadfastly to the unchanging God. This endurance is not easy, but it is precious. It is the evidence of a faith that trusts beyond what the eyes can see and beyond what the heart can feel. It is a faith that perseveres because it believes in a God who never fails. To never quit is more than mere perseverance. It is an act of worship. When a person refuses to give up despite trials, opposition, and suffering, they are not simply showing grit or determination. They are declaring, through their steadfastness, the worthiness of God. This kind of endurance becomes a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing, an offering that honors the one who sustains and calls us. Worship is not limited to songs sung or prayers uttered in a moment of comfort, but it is profoundly manifested in a life that clings to God when all else urges surrender. The essence of worship is recognizing and responding to the worth of God. To never quit in the face of hardship is to testify that God's glory, His promises, and His sovereignty matter more than temporary relief or worldly success. It is to say with unwavering resolve, "Your cause is my cause. Your glory is my highest pursuit, even if it costs me everything." This refusal to quit proclaims that the believer sees beyond pain to the surpassing worth of Christ, whose worthiness is the foundation for perseverance. When you endure suffering and trials, your refusal to quit reveals where your heart truly lies. Do you worship the fleeting comfort of this world, or do you worship the eternal God who is faithful? To quit is to worship the temporary over the eternal. To never quit is to worship the unseen King who has promised to never leave or forsake His own. The believer who presses on in faith declares through their endurance that the God of all grace is enough. Worship in this sense is costly. It demands a surrender that goes beyond moments of ease. It demands faithfulness in the valley of shadows, where hope is dim and the spirit aches. But it is precisely there, in that crucible of affliction, that true worship is revealed. It is easy to praise when the sun shines and the song flows freely. The true worshipper is known when the voice is faint, when the prayers are whispered through tears, and when the resolve is stretched thin. Never quitting becomes a testimony to the world. In a culture that celebrates success, comfort, and ease, endurance in suffering is a stark and powerful witness. It says, there is something greater than this life's troubles, something worth fighting for, worth suffering for. It is an unmistakable declaration that faith is not a mere sentiment, but a life surrendered to God's purposes. Such endurance shouts louder than any sermon or argument because it embodies the reality of the gospel. The scriptures overflow with examples of those who worshiped through endurance. Consider the prophets who were mocked and persecuted, yet did not recant their message. Consider Jesus himself, who endured the cross, despising its shame, for the joy set before him. His life was the ultimate act of worship through never quitting. The believers who follow him are called to take up the same cross, to walk the same path of faithfulness even to death. This kind of worship requires a heart that is fixed on God's glory rather than immediate outcomes. When the crowd cheers, worship is easy, but when the crowd turns hostile, when isolation and suffering press in, worship through endurance becomes a choice, daily dying to self and rising in faith. It is a choice to trust that God's glory will be revealed through perseverance. The Apostle Paul understood this well. His countless imprisonments, beatings, and hardships did not drive him to quit, but to worship through endurance. He knew that his suffering was not in vain, but was producing a harvest of righteousness and strengthening the church. His perseverance was a living offering, a fragrant sacrifice to God's glory. He could say with confidence that to live was Christ, and to die was gain, revealing that worship transcends earthly circumstances. Worship through never quitting also means recognizing that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. When we acknowledge our inability to endure alone, we glorify God by depending on his power. Our weakness becomes the stage upon which his grace shines brightest. Refusing to quit is then not a boast of human strength, but a testimony of divine sustaining power. It magnifies God's faithfulness and glory. Endurance as worship is deeply relational. It reflects a love for God that is not conditional on blessing, but is rooted in covenant faithfulness. It echoes the psalmist's cry, though the fig tree should not blossom, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. It is a worship that delights not because of what God gives, but because of who he is. The worshiper who never quits does so because their heart is captivated by God's character, not their circumstances. Moreover, never quitting is an act of obedience. Worship flows from obedience, and obedience often means carrying burdens, fighting battles, and standing firm when the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Jesus taught that those who love him keep his commandments, and one of the greatest commandments is to endure faithfully to the end. This obedience, born of worship, is the proof of genuine faith and love. The refusal to quit also sanctifies the believer's journey. Suffering and trials have a purpose in God's redemptive plan. When met with faith and endurance, they become tools of sanctification, shaping the believer's character into the image of Christ. Worship through endurance means embracing the refining work of God, recognizing that the difficulties are not meaningless, but are producing holiness and maturity. This kind of worship is deeply countercultural. The world tells us to seek ease, avoid pain, and prioritize comfort, but the gospel calls us to die to ourselves and live for God's glory. To never quit is to stand in opposition to the prevailing mindset. It is a declaration that the believer values God's approval over human applause, His kingdom over earthly gain. Worship through perseverance also brings glory to God by displaying His sustaining power to others. When others see a believer steadfast in faith despite hardship, it points to a strength beyond human capacity. It invites questions, opens doors for testimony, and leads souls to seek the source of such enduring hope. The perseverance of God's people thus becomes a tool for evangelism and a testimony to the reality of God's kingdom. In the struggle to never quit, worship deepens intimacy with God. When the believer is weak and vulnerable, dependent and desperate, they are drawn closer to the heart of God. Worship is not just about what we give to God, but about what He imparts to us in those moments. Peace, strength, assurance. Endurance through worship transforms suffering into communion with the divine. There is also a profound joy found in worshiping through endurance. This joy is not the superficial happiness of circumstances, but a deep, abiding gladness rooted in God's presence. It is the joy that Jesus experienced when He endured the cross. It is the joy that sustains believers through trials and fuels their perseverance. Worship in this sense is a source of strength and hope. Never quitting, as worship also means trusting in God's ultimate justice and vindication. When the believer suffers unfairly, refuses to give in to bitterness or despair, and continues to serve faithfully, they worship God by trusting His righteous judgment. They live in hope that one day every wrong will be made right, every tear wiped away, and every act of faithfulness rewarded. This hope fuels perseverance. The church is called to encourage this kind of worshipful endurance. The community of believers must stand together, lifting one another up, reminding each other of God's promises, and bearing each other's burdens. In this fellowship, endurance is nurtured and worship is deepened. The church's witness to the world is strengthened when its members embody never quitting as an act of worship. Never quitting is a spiritual warfare stance. The enemy desires to see believers give up, grow weary, and lose heart. To endure is to resist the devil's schemes and to advance the kingdom of God. This endurance worships God by refusing to allow Satan's attacks to prevail. It declares that God's purposes will triumph despite opposition. To never quit is also to glorify God's patience and mercy. God is long-suffering with His people, bearing with their weaknesses and failures. When believers persevere, they reflect His character to the world. Their endurance mirrors God's own faithfulness and love, making worship visible in the lives of His followers. The act of never quitting becomes a powerful prayer. Even when words fail, endurance speaks volumes. It says, "Lord, I trust You, I honor You, I am Yours." This silent worship carries a weight that moves heaven and earth. It aligns the believer's heart with God's will and pleases Him greatly. Never quitting in worship means embracing the cross daily. It is a call to die to self, to relinquish control, and to trust wholly in God's plan. This daily dying is costly but fruitful. It leads to resurrection power, transformation, and eternal reward. Worship through endurance is a journey of surrender that culminates in glory. This worship shapes the believer's identity. They no longer see themselves primarily as victims of circumstance, but as conquerors through Christ. Their value is found not in success or comfort, but in faithfulness. Their witness becomes a light in darkness, a testimony of God's sustaining grace. The refusal to quit is an act of hope. Worship always looks forward, anticipating the fulfillment of God's promises. It does not despair in the present, but expects victory. This hope empowers endurance and gives meaning to suffering. Worship through never quitting is hope made visible. In the face of weakness, despair, and opposition, to never quit is to say, God is enough. This confession honors God more than any spoken praise. It reveals a heart captivated by the divine worth and a soul anchored in eternal truth. Worship flows from this place of surrender and trust. Finally, never quitting is an invitation for God's glory to be revealed. When the believer endures, God's power is displayed. The impossible becomes possible, the weak become strong, and the faithless find hope. Worship through endurance allows God to manifest His greatness through human frailty. This ongoing act of worship transforms the believer's life and the world around them. It is a testament to the power of God and the reality of His kingdom. It inspires others to faith, deepens intimacy with God, and advances the cause of Christ. To never quit is not merely to survive, but to worship with every breath.